Hey, I'm Grant. Welcome to Second Plate. Today I'm going to make some bread. The plan for the show originally was to solve a problem where I would always have ingredients that spill over. And one of the big ones was, for myself, I'd constantly buy bread and it would constantly go moldy. And I love making bread, and it was just perfect because if you buy bread at the store, it lasts a week, maybe two. But if I buy flour, that lasts months. And at the same time, in 15 minutes, I can easily make the bread myself, and it has so many uses because it's very flexible, and at its heart, you just mix these 6 ingredients, it's going to come out, it's going to be fine. But at the same time, there's just so much detail you can get into about this or that, and you can have a lot of fun with it, and you can do all these nice little things. But at the end of the day, you can also just say, hey, I just pre-measured all these ingredients. Let me make some nice bread in 5 minutes and say, use it for hamburger buns or a baguette, and it's just really kind of cool. So what I'm going to be covering is how to make what I call Kaiser rolls. They kind of vary potentially a little bit from what officially might be a Kaiser roll, but that's what I always learned of it as. So this is going to take, officially I think the cook time for this is 2 hours, but it's only going to take, I don't think, that much time at all for preparation. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my mixing bowl, some yeast. This is basically one package of yeast that you would get just at a grocery store. I don't actually know the amount off the top of my head because I just use packets and they're just nice, and I like to not buy big packages of yeast because unless you cook a lot of bread, you don't use that much yeast. And two, yeast is something this is the most critical part of the bread, so you want to make sure this is fresh. And this is one of the things where it's actually very stressful to do this on the cooking show because you never know, you might just have bad yeast, you might use water that's too hot, you kill the yeast, and lots of things go wrong, but at home, it's not a big deal at all, just grab another packet. So that's personally my take. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by measuring out some water. I'm going to take half a cup of water, and you just want this to basically be lukewarm. I'd say room temperature. I think it's very easy to say, I used to be, when I started this recipe, I would basically leave my sink on hot for 6 minutes and then get that, and that would kill the yeast because it's way too hot for it. And bread in general is just really interesting. For example, I'm gonna put, again, this water, this yeast, and then about 1 tablespoon of sugar. And that's one thing I want to talk about with bread making is sugar, where if this was, say, cookies, I'm going to let this sit for 5 minutes as it grows. But if this was cookies, you put the sugar in for flavor, right? I want this to taste really good, so I'm going to put in a whole brick of sugar. And with bread, that's not the case. So I may look like I'm just going crazy and dumping more and more sugar in, or I'm just doing it sporadically. I'm actually it's really measured, where what's going to happen is I'm having this yeast, you put it in the water, and it starts growing. And the goal of the sugar is it gives it food to basically eat and grow and releases the gases. And then to combat that, we also have salt, where basically the more sugar, the faster the yeast grows. The more salt, the slower it grows. And it's this weird kind of seesaw where if you say have too much growth, it's too much rising, do you use less sugar or do you put in more salt? It's all these little knobs you can kind of turn to get the right thing. But at the heart of it, you really can't mess it up either. But I think it's important to understand that simple fact, that there's a reason you're putting this in. It's not just, oh, I gotta dump more in. At the same time, at this stage, I'm just gonna whisk this to make sure I kind of get everything I want going. At this point, if you want sweeter bread, this is not the time to add a ton of sugar. That'd be kind of later down the line. And obviously this does not apply to, say, if you're making banana bread. That's a different process. So again, I just whisk this. I don't know if you can say whisk it too hard, but I just like to kind of agitate it, go around. Usually you let that sit for about 5 minutes. It's not a big deal if you start too early. You'll notice that's usually bread in general. It's get anywhere between 100 degrees to 120 degree water and use anywhere between half a cup to about 3/4. You can't really get it wrong, but at the same time, there's so much you can just judge it yourself. So generally, I'm going to then go up here. I have some pre-measured ingredients. I believe I have, this is actually a recipe I split originally, so it's a 1/6 cup of canola oil. I have about 2 more teaspoons of sugar, 2 more tablespoons of sugar, I should say, all the sugars in tablespoons, 1 teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to go and mix that all up with about 4 cups of flour before I start kneading it, and that's going to be the basis of our dough, and we're going to get to kneading it and all that after letting it rise. So that should be good. It's been about 5 or so minutes. It doesn't need to be anything too crazy. I like to just kind of slowly sprinkle this in, so I'm going to add first the sugar, I don't really think there's any crazy of an order you can put this in, but I like to put the sugar in because I know like that's definitely not going to mess up the chemistry. And this is something where I've always meant to like get a really nice mixer, but I've always done it this way because that's what I had available. And I kind of like it, but it is one of the goals to one day eventually get used to like cooking with a giant mixer because it can just do it so much for you and you can have bread in just like minutes. Same with like a bread machine, but I feel like a bread machine where I wouldn't call it cheating to use a bread machine, but there's something about actually like working it with yourself versus basically having a bread microwave. That's probably not the best way to call it, but it's kind of what it feels like. So I'm going to add all my basic ingredients. And there's a lot of times where the reason I kind of want to like mention knowing the source of this is I've encountered a lot of recipes that are, this is the dough recipe. Step 1, make the dough. And it doesn't tell you anything else. It's just like, okay, you make the dough. So you basically kind of have to understand like those basics and then take it from there. And one of the things I kind of like about this recipe is it omits a lot of things that, again, with the heart of the show, would spoil or go bad. Like I know there's a lot of recipes that say call for pre-melted butter, eggs, stuff like that, whereas with this, basically other than the yeast, which again you can buy for like 99 cents, it's all stuff that I can keep in my cavern, in my, say just my kitchen, stocked around. And then when I want bread, I just make it instead of having to go to the store. Or go to be like, hey, I'm gonna make burgers, I have moldy bread, now I have to go get some more. It's just a nice little thing. So I got my flour. Go ahead and I'm gonna start getting it out. I will say one thing that I'm too lazy to do that you should do is flour is supposed to be measured in weight, not by volume. Because flour, being what it is, can actually be compacted. So you can have flour that's really dense and you don't realize it, but you're putting way more than you intend. So I'm gonna put half a cup in. Again, the goal is to put about 4 cups in before I start kneading it. And then I'm going to add anywhere between 2 cups, and then add in about 1 more. One of the skills I've yet to master is just keeping track of all those, because again, originally I have this recipe, but the point was to actually cook mainly again for myself or a couple people, so I don't need to be making, say, 16 rolls. So I like to start with a whisk, just because it's nice and easy. I like to just kind of like scrape just around this as I go. Nice and simple. This is something where it's entirely your preference how much. If you feel brave, you could toss it all in. Especially if you have a mixer, you can just basically pre-portion it into a bowl and just slowly mix it in as it turns. But with this, I usually like to put half a cup in, mix it, half a cup, mix it. Plus then you don't get stuck where all of a sudden the dough is way thicker than you intended and you're still got your whisk in there and your whisk cannot handle it. This is a new whisk too. It's actually a gift, so I don't want to start like bending it because I'm just too eager on my dough. I've also noticed, because I was testing a lot of different recipes for bread dough just in advance of doing the show, and I was surprised, like, as you do it, there's definitely certain personalities to some recipes. Like, so this one, what's interesting about it is it's very good to like slowly layer it in, I've noticed. Whereas the one I was doing before, the one that used like egg and butter, basically you gave it all at once and it would say consume, let's say, a fair amount of the flour and then it wouldn't touch anything else until you kneaded it, and then about like minute 8 or 9 of kneading it for 10 minutes, all of a sudden it would just like suck in the rest of the flour, just because of how the moisture works. Whereas this, it won't take flour instantly like a whole bunch, but you just need to like slowly knead like a little bit more, a little bit more. You'll really notice it when I'm actually kneading the dough that I have to keep just adding like, okay, another like half a cup or a fourth a cup, because it won't take it all at once, but at the same time it kneads it in smaller amounts than the other recipe does. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in about another half a cup. At this point, the dough is still very wet, and you can kind of see that, where if I just like slough this up on the table, it wouldn't be what I want. This is already one of the things where you can kind of see how you just have to, I guess, develop an eye, something I'm still working on, about when you have too much flour, when's not enough flour. Are you just too early in the process? Looks like I'm actually ready to go get off of this, so I'm just going to kind of get as much as I can off of my whisk. Put this down on a plate. And then I use a small wooden spoon. Honestly, I don't think there's any perfect utensil for this, so it's all entirely preference. I've seen people use, say, like a rubber spatula. That works. If you want to, say, keep using a whisk, or I'm sure you could use a fork, something like that if you want a big spoon. Just kind of whatever you want. If you want to immediately dive right in, you can do that too and do it with your hands. It looks like, in this case, I'm probably going to do that pretty soon. Just because as I look around, like it starts to get, I guess what I'd call stringy. And that's just basically, as far as I know, is because parts of the dough are taking some of the flour, but it's not all thoroughly mixed. So I got about 1.5 cups in there right now. And I need to get this to about 3. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to start just kneading it. And it's going to be super sticky because, again, it likes to take it in slow amounts, where it won't take any more right now, but then I'll start kneading it just a little bit. And all of a sudden, it's like all the dough I put down there, it just ate up all the flour. So, and really, I can't really like mess this up. It's just like kind of like finding as I go. So I'm going to go ahead and just flour my hands and start forming a ball. Right now, it's super disjointed. I can't really even knead it, but I'm just going to start kind of forming it until it gets at least one consistent ball of dough and then really set in on it. Okay, there we go. It's starting to get pretty good. So kneading, there's no real trick. There's a ton of ways you can knead dough. You can get it automatically done. I like to do it with my hands. Really, basically what kneading is just you're going to keep folding it, pushing it into itself, and basically just agitating it. So whatever that means to you works. Like I know some people will basically just fold it in half and hit it with a rolling pin over and over. You can roll it. Some people just basically kind of throw it between their hands, stretch, pull it. But I guess generally the classic way is you just kind of take half of it, fold it towards myself, and I'm just going to press in with my palm. And basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to knead it for about 6 to 10 minutes. I've not yet developed a skill where I can kind of just know it by sight, because honestly, when you first start, they say like 6 to 10 minutes, but your kneading isn't that good, so it's more like 15. But it's a weird mix of it being out in the air, how much flour you add, stuff like that. But yeah, generally if you notice, I generally will push it out as I go. I turn about clockwise, counterclockwise, halfway, fold it, push it into itself. And that's all. I find also bread making is very fun to do, like if you just want to, I don't know, like take out some stress, because there's nothing wrong with, say, like getting a nice ball and then just really like throwing all your weight into it. That also works. Or if I'm just like hanging out, listening to music, and just be like, pat, pat. Really, there's no wrong way to do it. And it depends on like what kind of dough you have, and you just kind of like get a style. I think one of my main complaints about making bread is that you usually make so much, it's hard to do it a lot of the time. So like that's one of the reasons like I love doing this show, because I could just say, I think I made 16 Kaiser rolls last night. And it was just like, hey, I could just sit down and just keep trying and keep learning and be like, hey, that didn't work out. Next recipe, I'm going to add more water and just see how that goes out, and that's kind of cool. One thing I know I personally doing is that this recipe, I feel like if you've never made bread before, seems really intimidating, and like it's going to take a lot of time to do in the day. But I know one thing I really want to start just experimenting with is just getting some like simple little mason jars and say putting a unopened packet of yeast and then all the dry ingredients, so say my salt, my sugar, what have you, and then just a little like post-it note on the edge that says how to actually make it. So then if I say, oh, you know what, I want to make burgers tonight, it's like 3 o'clock, or I want to eat at like 6, I just grab the mason jar, be like, okay, open up that yeast, toss it in some water, let that simmer, read the rest, toss in all the dry ingredients, toss in all the flour, toss in the wet ingredients, and you're good to go. Because I found like the longest part of bread making, other than waiting for it to rise, is just the fact that I have to keep looking at the recipe. But if you have it just down in like a nice simple note form, like I just have a notebook, I saw like over here, where I just write down like little adjustments like, oh, use more water next time. And then you can just throw this together so quickly. And a lot of times I would just be like talking to someone when I do this, or like listening to something, because you don't need to pay that much attention. Like I'm talking to a camera, and I'm just kind of rolling the dough. Like I'm not really even paying attention. You just kind of get a rhythm to it. And it's just nice and simple. Basically what you're kind of looking for is the dough kind of develops a skin. Like it looks like this time it didn't need nearly as much flour as I did last time because it's not sticking at all. Like when I was making these last night, I just constantly come in and like scrape it off. But this is pretty solid as itself, so kind of keep going. And there's a couple different ways to tell when it's done. Basically, the process behind why you need is it like, I'm told, is it's keeping the gluten like together and forming. So you can usually tell by trying to pull it apart and feeling how strong it is. There is a test called, I believe it's the Windowpane Test, where you stretch it. And I don't know if this will come across on camera. But the goal is it should be able to get thin. First of all, you pull it. It shouldn't tear too much. But you can actually hold it up to light and see through it because it's strong enough to stay together. Where if it's not done yet, it will just rip. It's like that. So this probably needs a little more. But if I were to like hold this up to light, you can begin to like see through it because it's strong enough. Another nice thing about dough, I ripped it. You will not notice at all because it's instantly back together. So it's not a big deal. And the fact that I'm like ripping and tearing, still kneading it. It's still like agitating it, working in the flour. It's really hard to go wrong. And like I said, like if you get really into this, you can get a bread machine. You can get, say, a mixer where it will knead it for you, in which case making bread is easy. You just throw stuff together and you wait, and then you have fresh bread. I think the hardest thing for me is having space, because it takes a lot of space to just cover everything in flour and to work. Cool. So generally this is getting pretty close to what it would be. So generally what I would do is I would take another bowl. I just have whatever I have on hand. I usually don't use this because I'm a huge fan of washing my dishes as I go. So normally I would want to leave that so I can wash it. I would then grease down this. You can also use like a Ziploc bag, like that's what I use for like pizza. And I just usually put that in there. I'm going to go ahead and cover it up. And I would let this rise somewhere warm. I'm a huge fan of just leaving it on my fridge. Or in my case, I know where the fan for my heater is in the winter that comes out, the vent. So I just leave it like right there and it's perfect where I'm not steaming, but I know it's warm. Luckily though, I actually have some of this prepared. So I have this dough here, which was the full recipe from before, fully risen. This was actually sat overnight in a fridge because you can actually refrigerate dough a fair amount. Like if I've been getting really into pizza dough lately, which actually calls for refrigerating it 24 hours before you use it, which is super handy. But I'm going to go ahead and grease this down because I don't want any more flour as this is already risen. And I'm going to take this. Hopefully come out. Go ahead and use this just to kind of coax it. And even though this is the same recipe as that is, you can kind of tell the chemical difference between it and what this is right here. Even though, again, the only difference is basically leaving it for a couple hours, more so in this. And you think this would look really sticky because it looks sticky, especially the part where it was on the pot because of the grease. It's not at all, it's really cold. So what I'm going to do is, these are going to become our Kaiser rolls, or our hamburger buns. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to begin separating it. So this is double, so I actually want to go fairly big because I want to try a couple things. I'm going to separate. Again, having just a giant scraper is an underrated tool in the kitchen. When I worked in that kitchen originally, that was something I learned where, you know, it's nice to have like fancy utensils, but there's something to be said for just like a big piece of metal that's like you can just clean easily and just scrape. So you can separate these. I could put flour on my hands if I need to or grease them down, but this is nice and simple. This might actually be a little too big, so I'm going to make it in force though to demonstrate this. So what we're going to do is make Kaiser rolls. And Kaiser rolls, generally they're characterized either by, when you have them in a roll, you will cut them with scissors, like with an X, but not all the way through, so they rise, they have like these little gaps. Or they're folded similar to a pretzel where, and that's what I'm going to do for the first one, I'm going to roll it out into a long, thin noodle, probably about this long, and then I'm going to kind of braid it into itself to seal it, and then you cook them ideally upside down so they hold their shape. And it just looks kind of neat, and it's not hard at all to do. So what I'm going to do is, if you ever played with Play-Doh as a kid, this is basically what it's going to be, is I'm going to start with just classic thinning out. This stuff's not hard at all. And again, this feels like this must just be so sticky, but it's not, especially if you like grease down your table or your counter or what have you. Get it pretty down. I can't do this the whole way because this thing has so much mass. You can actually see the bubbles popping. I'm not sure if that comes across where there's a lot of air because it's been risen. So you'll see those kind of come out and just pop, and it's not a big deal. Usually I just kind of like get them out of the way. Anyway, I'm going to clear some space here. Because again, I don't want to get any more flour than I need in here. And now this is the part where I think it has a little bit more technique. What I'm going to do is I need to lengthen this, but I don't want to just pull it. You can pull it, and it will sometimes work, but depending on your quality of dough and how uniform it is, I wouldn't recommend it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with simply rolling it. Looks like I might need just a little bit more grease. Again, I'm just using pan spray. If you have like a really good non-stick surface, like I have some non-stick mats that I usually bake with that I'll just put down, but I'm going to roll it, very simple. And what I do is I like to roll it forward evenly, and then as I pull down, I kind of like pull apart just like that. And just wherever I feel like it's the thickest, like right here, there's obviously a chunk that kind of comes up. I like to just roll up it and go down and apart. And then as you get a feel for it, like this is really thick because I want to demonstrate, so I'm probably not going to tear this. So I'm just going to keep separating it. Pull it apart so I can do like a section. You can go faster as you get a feel for it. It's honestly one of the more fun stuff, and like I was speaking before how I like to have people like actually do stuff in my kitchen as a cook, not because I particularly want like to shove all the work off onto them, but just because like this is the fun part. So like, yeah, why not have someone come in and just work on it? Like, hey, you want to roll your own Kaiser roll, and then we can fold it together because like, yeah, it's fun. So this should be good for the sake of actually rolling it out. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to make an overhand knot, or basically a granny knot if you're more familiar with that. So I'm just going to take it, kind of cross over, bring one under, like so. Looks kind of like a pretzel. And this is where you can go a lot of different ways. Sometimes you can go like really thin and really long, and you pull it tight. Again, not literally, you set it up as if you pulled it tight. Or you can go really thick and just kind of find it along the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one that's thinner. I'm going to stretch it around a couple times as best I can. It's not a big deal if it doesn't come out. But basically I want it to end up ideally in the center, so it fills this center hole. Because then for the other one, I want to come around and it to come up top on that center roll. This is, the dough doesn't work exactly right because I'm left in the fridge overnight, so it's really trying to fight me because it's over-risen. I would generally need to work this a lot more, or you might want to say leave it, because generally what I would do is I would make this roll. You can already kind of see the wraps. If you go really thin, you can get all the nice tiny little wraps, but that takes a lot of time. But generally what I like to do is not have it rise all the way. You let it rise for an hour, again with like the one I just put offset. And after an hour, you start rolling it, put it on a pan, and then you let it rise another hour. I'm going to make the other style. I'm just going to pat this down, get a nice, I like to make them oblong, like so. And you can do it however you want, but I like it oblong more than a circular. It just seems it works better. And I'll usually take some meat scissors. Another pet peeve I have is meat scissors are specifically for culinary stuff, so don't use your meat scissors to say like open packages. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it once this way, once this way. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to actually close the scissors like this. I'm just going to cut towards it, and as I come close, just stop. Again, just cut close, but stop. And what this does is you'll get these little gaps here, but they're all still pinched tight at the center. And the reason for that is it keeps the center together when it bakes. You can do it where you can snip all the way through, but what you, instead of having like this nice roll that's uniformly rising outward with these cuts that has softer bread inside that isn't the hard crust, you end up instead with like a tulip where those edges that are cut will like brown and like blacken because they're thin and they'll turn outward, which honestly is its own aesthetic and kind of neat. I'm a big fan of poppy seeds, honestly, because again, with like the whole idea of the show, I like reusable ingredients. It's a big part of it for me. And you can put sesame seeds, but I don't put sesame seeds on anything else. But I will put poppy seeds on like muffins. Just kind of put those in. This is going to look like it's super thick, but most of these will not stick. So it's not a big deal. Plus, after the next step, some of these are going to brush off. But again, this is totally just flair. It's not a big deal if you don't have this at all. Now, so I usually cook these, I believe it's at 475. Yeah, 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 to 20 minutes. But there's a really important step that I feel like I never heard mentioned when I started baking is you can put these in as is and it's totally fine. Like these will come out well. Now, there's basically 3 different things you can put on it though at this point. The first one that a lot of people do is egg white. Basically, egg white is what gives a baguette its really hard exterior that's really shiny, has a lot of gloss. That's really good if you want like hard rolls, like something to serve with like a steak dinner. What I personally do is I use the opposite of that, where you can put milk on it, like a 2% milk. It makes them very soft, which if you want them for like a sandwich, that's more like the way you want to go. You just have to be careful, whereas like because the baguette with the egg whites, they get really hard, they can cook longer. The milk will make it softer and it will burn quicker. The third option really is basically like olive oil. If you're looking for something more like basically a pizza or a calzone, that's the third option. I wouldn't use it for these, but it is there if you want something like really, honestly, kind of greasy or like olive oily. But generally, I'd say like 2% milk. I just put it in like a small little cup like this. I have a brush. I just go down, put it wherever. It doesn't matter if you spill it because it's just going to cook off. It's not a big deal at all. And basically what they kind of come out looking like is like this. These are all I use the milk for. And that's why you have this really like soft, nice brown. If you use the egg whites, it's much more of like this color, where it's dark kind of all around. And that's nice. It just depends on what you want to use the roll for. Whereas I like these for sandwiches, so I like that softness so you can like actually bite into it. And it's pretty nice. Usually I get a nice brown here. You can kind of just tear into them. They're light, fluffy. So we basically have our finished Kaiser rolls. What's awesome about these is they're really flexible, so what I'd literally like to show again with the spirit of the show is, what can I take this awesome roll and use it for? So next week I'm going to take these and we're going to kind of cut them up and use them for burger buns. And they're actually way better than what you buy for store because you can tailor them exactly for the burgers you're making and exactly what you need them to be.